The chamber was hushed but for the muttering wind. Princess Renoria II sat alone in her study, an hour too late for company, too cold for comfort. Shadows leaned long against the stone, drawn out by the weary fire in the hearth, whose flames had grown tired of dancing. They glowed just enough to remind her that warmth is a fragile thing. Upon her desk lay the journal. Its leather was scarred and weathered, edges darkened by years and travels, as though it too had borne burdens across broken lands. Her fingers lingered on the engraving upon its cover, Ramses Payton, as though the weight of that name might break the silence and answer her longing. Her godfather was gone now, ashes in the wind, voice folded into memory. And yet, in this book he lived still, ink and parchment carrying the echo of his tread, his counsel, his grief. She opened it slowly, careful as though the binding itself might crumble at her touch. The crack of the spine sighed like old bones. As she turned the pages, her eyes caught upon a passage written in his hand. The words stared back with solemnity. Upon my back I carried the future. Her breath trembled. She reached for her glass, crimson wine quivering against the rim, and took a sip, not to savour, but to steady herself. The journal smelled faintly of smoke and travel, of nights when he had written by torchlight, while she, only an infant then, lay bound securely upon his back. Leaning against her chair, she whispered the words aloud as though conjuring his voice from memory. Upon my back I carried the future. Date, 02 November/01, the very year of the fall of the realm. Renoria, her cries have ceased, not from comfort, but from exhaustion and hunger. The soundless struggle wrenches my heart. The daughter of a queen, noble by birth, condemned to the hardships of a fugitive's life, here in these cold, merciless woods. It has been 2 days since food last passed my lips, and the princess, still a child, has not tasted bread since dawn. Though my powers could summon sustenance with ease, I restrain the urge. Any trace of magic might betray us to those who hunt us without rest. The temptation gnaws at me, one simple gesture to ease her suffering, yet the risk of exposure holds my hand still. Such is the cruel irony of this life. The very act of preservation may lead to ruin. Despair presses upon me as I weigh her plight against the fate of Whitehaven, its people slaughtered, its streets drowned in fire and ash. In such grim light, her hunger seems almost merciful compared to what her people endured. My queen entrusted me with her bloodline. I stand now as the last sentinel for her youngest daughter. The text turns jagged, encrypted by some hidden magic. Renoria narrowed her eyes, struggling to force sense from the symbols. The letters shifted, blurred, resisting her gaze. After long minutes, she sighed in defeat, turning past the encrypted lines and continued reading. Here, in the embrace of these ancient woods, I face the grim certainty of failing yet again. My queen gave me her most precious treasure, and I am but a man, stumbling, powerless, drowning in despair. Should fate deliver me to the realms beyond, I will seek her out. I will kneel before her, my soul bare, my failures laid open, and I will beg her forgiveness. I can only hope the mercy she embodied in life will extend to her reign in eternity. But for now, I am alone, surrounded by dangers unseen, haunted by the spectres of my shortcomings, a solitary figure with nowhere left to turn. Renoria's hand lingered on the worn cover, her fingers tracing the scars of leather as the ache rose within her chest. The words lingered like embers in her mind, her godfather's hunger, his silence, his unyielding devotion to her mother's charge. She felt the weight of his sacrifice press against her shoulders, as though the phrase, "Upon my back I carried the future," had been passed to her, now etched into her own bones. For a moment, the fire's frail glow seemed a mirror of his strength, flickering, battered by wind and shadow, yet enduring still. And she whispered into the silence, almost as if he might hear, "You did not fail me." Then she flipped the page and continued reading. Desperation clung to the air like the thick fog that suffocated the ruined keep, a grim sanctuary that now felt more like a snare. Through the frost-laced windows, my heart sank. We are besieged. The woods teem with the dead. Twisted, gnarled forms shamble from the mist like spectres of doom, their hollow eyes glinting in the frozen dark. They encircle us, slow and patient, an inexorable noose tightening with every passing moment. Every desperate glance through the glass yields the same sight, the gaze of lifeless sentinels pressing closer. Within these walls, silence is broken only by the faint, ragged breaths of young Renoria. She lies cradled in my arms, her fragile rest purchased at too heavy a cost. It was my hand that brought this upon us, my spell meant to soothe her cries, meant to conjure a meagre feast. Yet mercy became beacon, light became signal, and now our hunters converge upon us. Dread coils in me as I reckon with what must come next. They do not march in mindless hunger. No, this tide of corpses moves with purpose. They come not merely to erase her bloodline, but to seize her for some foul design beyond my comprehension. That they hasten so fervently, that they seek her not dead but alive, chills me more than the wind that creeps through these shattered walls. Renoria weakens by the hour, her breath shallow, her pulse faint, a candle in the storm, flickering against inevitable night. And I see it now with grim clarity. They want her unbroken. The cold will not claim her. Hunger will not claim her. They will not allow it, for they covet her for something darker, something unspeakable. And in this bleakest hour, my soul is pressed against its cruelest test. I find myself haunted by the thought no guardian should bear, that if the walls are breached, if no hope remains, I may be forced to grant her mercy with my own hands. To end her life before their claws seize her, to protect her not by preserving her breath, but by denying them their prize. The thought alone is a torment, a wound deeper than any blade. I beg forgiveness of my queen, even as I know she cannot hear me. Should this hand falter, should this heart break beneath the burden, I pray she understands. For here, encircled by the black tide and the hunger of the grave, my resolve is tested as never before, and I tremble at the edge of damnation. Renoria's grip tightened around the journal, her knuckles whitening against the scarred leather. The words carved into the page seemed to bleed into her, each one carrying the weight of her godfather's torment. Her breath caught when she reached the passage of his unthinkable choice, to end her life rather than let her be taken. The thought pressed into her like a blade. For a moment she could scarcely breathe, the image of herself as a child, fragile, shivering, unknowingly balanced between life and death, flickering before her mind's eye. A storm of emotions welled within her, grief for the suffering he endured in silence, awe at the depth of his devotion, and a sorrow so sharp it left her trembling. He had been prepared to bear a curse no guardian should ever shoulder, to stain his hands with the blood of the child he swore to protect, all to spare her from horrors unseen. That love, twisted by desperation into such a monstrous duty, made her heart ache and her eyes blur with unshed tears. She leaned forward, her fingers resting lightly on the ink, as if by touch alone she could reach through the years and ease his burden. A whisper escaped her lips, barely louder than the fire's weary crackle. I live, because you bore that choice alone. The words hung in the cold air, fragile, reverent, and heavy with gratitude. Then, drawing in a steadying breath, she fixed her gaze upon the page once more, and let her eyes drift to the next lines, unwilling to turn away from what came next. She reads. The battle's toll is evident. I am spent, bloodied, and broken. The vigour that once fueled my guardian druid form is extinguished, drained by ceaseless combat and unrelenting assaults. My body, once a bastion of strength, now bears the marks of this brutal siege. Bite marks and scars mar my beastly form, and my neck, grievously wounded, bleeds profusely. The relentless bleeding, coupled with my dulled claws and broken teeth, heralds the inevitable. Time blurs, days melding into a relentless fight for survival. I've felled countless foes, yet they surge forth like a tide, unending and merciless. My strength wanes, and with it my hope dwindles. At one point I thought I might live another day, but then I heard that tone. The haunting lullaby pierces the chaos, a sinister melody that spells doom. It's her, the orchestrator of this nightmare, Annie, and then from the mists emerged that massive undead bear. I battled the beast with every shred of my remaining might, but it overpowered me, its massive form a harbinger of death. Yet as it stood poised to deliver the final blow, it halted, retreating into the mist. This reprieve is not kindness but cruelty, a ploy to prolong my suffering. My guardian druid form has fought valiantly, bearing the brunt of endless waves of corruption. Yet even the mighty bear's strength has its limits. I have shielded the young princess from the encroaching darkness as long as fate would allow, but now the end looms near. The despair of imminent defeat fuels a rage within me. I am enraged at my impending failure, at the breach of my sacred duty to protect. The weight of inevitability presses down on me. The decision that lies before me is one of grim mercy, to grant the princess a peaceful end, to spare her the horror of falling into the malevolent clutches of our foes. It is a decision that tears at the very fabric of my soul, yet it must be made. In these possibly final moments, as I prepare to take an act I never imagined, I am consumed by a mix of rage and sorrow. Yet I hold on to a sliver of hope that my actions, my sacrifices, will be understood and forgiven in the realms beyond. Should I meet my end here, I pray that Princess Renoria, in her innocence, will stand as witness to my unwavering loyalty and the purity of my intentions. Her words, should they echo in the halls of the afterlife, might offer a measure of solace to my tormented soul. My beloved queen, I offer this solace. Soon you will embrace the daughter you barely knew, in a realm where no shadow falls. This act, born of desperate love and duty, is my final service to you, my queen, my charge. Anyone who might one day leaf through the worn pages of this journal understand this truth. Ramses Payton was no traitor. Every desperate measure, each dire act I've recorded here, was born not of malice or betrayal, but from a deep, unyielding love and devotion to my queen. My choices, made in these harrowing final hours, were guided by nothing less than the fierce loyalty that has defined my existence. Renoria's fingers lingered on the page long after the words had ended, her eyes tracing the last line as though it might yet reveal more. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she closed the journal. The sound of the leather shutting was soft, but in her ears it resounded like a tomb sealing shut. She sat back, the book heavy in her lap, her heart even heavier. For a long moment she said nothing. The fire had all but died, leaving only smouldering embers, and in their dull glow she imagined Ramses, bloodied, torn, still standing, still shielding her with the last vestiges of his strength. The thought made her chest tighten until her breath shuddered out. "How could you have borne this alone?" she whispered, her voice trembling into the silence. Her gaze fell to the floor, but her mind's eye would not release the image. Her godfather facing an endless tide of horrors, haunted by Annie's song, locked in a battle that stripped flesh from bone, spirit from hope. She imagined his great druid form, once majestic, broken beneath claw and fang, yet still refusing to yield. And then, the unbearable thought, his hand hovering over her infant self, prepared to grant her mercy in death, rather than surrender her to the dark. The enormity of it pressed down upon her until her throat burned with unspilled tears. She rose, clutching the journal to her chest, as though by drawing it closer she might draw closer to him. "You called yourself no traitor," she murmured, her voice stronger now, firmer, echoing against the stone chamber walls. "And you were not. You were my shield, my guardian, my truest friend. Every scar you bore, every desperate choice was for me." Her voice broke then, and softer, she added, "And I will not let the world forget it." The embers hissed, a soft sigh in the silence, and she closed her eyes. She imagined Ramses in the afterlife, kneeling before her mother as he had once written he would, confessing his failures. She wanted to reach across that unseen divide, to cry out so that he might hear her. "You did not fail. You never failed. I live because you endured." And in that moment, beneath the weight of grief and gratitude, Princess Renoria II swore to herself that her godfather's truth would not remain bound in fragile parchment. It would live in her voice, in her reign, in the memory of a realm reborn. The journal still pressed to her chest, and with a voice soft but commanding, she called to a servant lingering at the door. "Rekindle the fire," she murmured. The servant bowed low and moved swiftly to obey, yet Renoria lingered not to watch. She drifted instead toward the tall, arched window of Proud's bastion. There she stood, framed in the dim light, her breath faint against the frozen glass. Her golden hair, loose from the day's plaits, caught the pale glimmer of moonlight spilling over the peaks of Danham Valley. It cascaded over her shoulders like threads of sunlight trapped in winter's grip. Her gown, of deep sapphire velvet, trailed across the floor in solemn folds, its silver embroidery shimmering faintly like frost-laced constellations. She drew the fur-lined mantle closer about her, but it did little to ease the chill that gnawed deeper than flesh. Her icy blue eyes gazed outward, reflecting the vast expanse of snowbound peaks. They shone with a light both fierce and sorrowful, eyes that mirrored the weight of a legacy steeped in loss, yet still carried the quiet defiance of survival. Beyond the glass, the mountains loomed in spectral silence, their crowns veiled in ghostly mist, guardians of a land that had seen too much blood. A heaviness clung to her spirit as she stared into that bleak expanse. She thought of her godfather's words, of his blood spilled and his devotion written in agony across the pages she held. The cold beyond the window felt no different than the cold within her heart, a silence where grief and duty wrestled in unending embrace. The crackle of new flames stirred behind her as the servant fed fresh wood to the hearth. Golden light began to climb the walls, pushing back the gloom, yet Renoria did not turn at once. She allowed herself one final glance at the valley, her breath fogging against the glass. A whisper escaped her lips, carried only to the silence. "You are not forgotten." Then, with measured grace, she turned back to the chamber. The fire had risen again, casting warmth against stone and steel. She crossed the floor, the trailing hem of her gown whispering like a sigh of sorrow, and returned to her study. With careful hands, she lowered herself into the chair once more, set the journal upon the desk, and, steadying her breath, resumed reading from where she had left off. Miraculously, I am still breathing, and so is young Renoria. 4 days have elapsed since that fateful confrontation with the undead horde and Annie, a battle I was certain would be my last. Yet here we are, spared against all odds, leaving me in a state of disbelief over the surreal events that unfolded. It is imperative that I chronicle these occurrences while they are vivid in my mind, almost as if they are still unfolding before my eyes. Each moment of that encounter feels etched in my memory with startling clarity, compelling me to recount them without omitting any detail. As Annie's bear dissolved into the shadows, a tactic she employed to heighten my torment, I seized the fleeting opportunity to regroup and summon the remnants of my strength. Ignoring the encroaching undead, I surged toward the young queen. In that moment, laden with despair and wrought with a guardian's agony, I found myself making the gravest decision a protector could face. The weight of my intended action bore down on me like the cold, unyielding shackles of fate. As I gathered my remaining strength, each step toward her was a battle against my sworn duty, a betrayal of the very oath I had taken to safeguard her life at all costs. My heart pounded with a heavy mix of dread and resolve. The thought of taking her life was a torment unlike any physical wound. This was no mere tactical maneuver. It was a desperate ploy to disrupt the dark designs arrayed against us. If her life was the linchpin in their vile scheme, then her death might grant her an escape from becoming a pawn in a game of unspeakable horrors. Yet as I advanced through the mist, my resolve faltering with each haunted step, a profound hesitation gripped me. The reality of my actions, the sheer finality of what I was poised to commit, struck a chilling chord within my soul. I was her guardian, chosen to protect, not to harm. The juxtaposition of my duty against this morbid solution bore heavily on me, a grotesque contradiction to everything I stood for. Approaching what I believed would be a pivotal moment, an inexplicable hesitation seized me. From the swirling mists before me, a figure began to coalesce, halting my advance with an unsettling presence. As the vapors solidified, the silhouette of a man emerged, though to call him merely a man would not suffice. His presence exuded an otherworldly aura, palpably powerful and distinctly non-human, casting an ethereal glow that seemed to warp the very air around us. Reflecting upon the encounter, I can now vividly recall the figure that emerged from the mists. The being I encountered bore an otherworldly visage. His eyes were like deep wells of the cosmos, filled with stars and the vast expanse of space. Clad not in armor, but in simple robes that flowed around him as if woven from the fabric of time itself, he seemed unburdened by the need for physical protection. In one hand, he held a staff that pulsed with an ancient energy, and in the other a sand timepiece that trickled endlessly. His arms were marked with runes that glowed softly, symbols I recognized as connected to the essence of time and the weaving of fate. As I dared to step closer, he merely raised a hand, and the fabric of reality around us halted. It was a cessation so profound that the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The undead were suspended mid-motion, a tableau of halted horrors. The ones that were lunging remained captured in their ferocity, and even those mid-air were frozen, as if time itself had been ensnared by this enigmatic figure's will. In the suspended silence of the frozen woods, his voice resounded with an authority that seemed to weave through the very air, commanding without a shout, "She will live." The profundity of those words sent a ripple through my soul, instilling an obedience that felt as natural as breathing. His decree, uttered so simply yet with irrevocable power, left no room for dissent within me. It was as though his will had become in that moment an unbreakable law of nature. Renoria's pulse quickened as she reached the end of the passage, her eyes wide with the weight of what she had just read. The figure in the mists, his words, his power, lingered in her mind like a haunting echo. For a heartbeat she sat still, lips parted as though to whisper a question into the silence, but no words came. Instead, with a sharp breath, she pressed her palm against the page as though steadying herself, then quickly flipped to the next. Compelled by an urgency she could neither resist nor quell, desperate to uncover what revelation awaited her in the lines beyond. As the mysterious man moved past me, his presence alone seemed to stir the air back into motion. The scene around us, previously locked in a stillness akin to a painted canvas, burst back to life. Yet as the undead attempted to converge on us once more, they met an invisible barrier around this enigmatic figure. With a mere gesture, a sweep of his hand through the chilling air, the creatures crumbled to dust, erased from existence as if they were figments of imagination. The fearsome undead bear, a monstrous entity under Annie's command, lunged with ferocious speed, only to be hurled away into the darkness, vanishing into the mist as effortlessly as a pebble skimmed across a lake. Approaching Annie, I could feel the tension escalate palpably. In her eyes there flared not only the typical malice of her kind, but a genuine disturbance, a crack in her usual facade of serene cruelty. "This is not your domain, Eredzion," she hissed. Her voice, though laced with anger, carried an undercurrent of fear. "Let me have my dolly. I just want my dolly." Eredzion, undisturbed by her words, responded with a calm that belied the storm of power at his command. "You will not have her. Not today. Return back." Her retort was swift, challenging his authority. "Or what? Will you hurt me? Will you break one more of your vows? You've broken one already. The higher one will be displeased." Her words hinted at a deeper narrative, a story of promises and powers beyond my understanding. "Do not invoke the wrath of your creator." His reply, delivered in a tone markedly harsher than before, did not waver. I said leave. The command carried a finality that even Annie could not contest. Despite her evident reluctance, marked by a sinister smile that lingered disturbingly on her lips, she receded into the misty veil from which she had emerged. After Annie and her undead minions retreated into the shadows, this mysterious being turned to address me directly. His voice held an ominous weight as he commanded, "Travel south," his arm extending to point firmly in the designated direction. No sooner had the words left his lips than the sky erupted in turmoil. A thunderous roar filled the air, more ferocious than any storm I had witnessed. Lightning cracked across the firmament, a spectacular display of nature's power that seemed to split the heavens themselves. Bolts struck the ground near us, their searing heat turning the surrounding trees into pillars of fire and ash. Throughout this maelstrom, Eredzion remained a figure of stoic calm. As he gazed upward at the raging sky, I sensed signs of concern etch his features. Turning his attention back to me, his expression grew somber. "My judgment draws near," he intoned, the weight of his fate resonating in his voice. "I can offer you the respite of 4 days. Travel south as fast as you can. Under the shade of a mighty red oak you will find your refuge." With those final cryptic instructions, this mysterious being vanished, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the raging tempest that had momentarily bound our destinies. Renoria felt the name coil through her like cold smoke. Annie, the child Ramses had warned her of, the child she herself had glimpsed only once, and yet whose presence seemed to haunt the edges of every quiet room. The memory of that small, sorrow-soft voice crept back, a thread pulled through her thoughts until it snagged at the heart. I just want my Dolly. The words were simple, almost tender, yet in them lay a dread that did not belong to any nursery. What did she mean? What Dolly? Renoria had none. Night after night she had searched trunks, satchels, pockets of old cloaks, the hidden compartments of her desk, the cedar chest that kept the last kindnesses of a kingdom gone to ash. Nothing. Only the sense of being watched by a grief that was not hers, and the echo of a plea that did not fade. I just want my Dolly. Was it a riddle? A lost relic? Or was it simply a snare, threads of a child's longing woven into a web to loosen her mind, to pull her towards some unseen brink? She tried to listen past the whisper, past the ache it stirred, to the steadier drum of her will. If it is a trick, I will not break. If it is a truth, the pages will lead me to it. She raised the glass, took a slow, bracing sip, and, without lifting her hand from the open journal, let her eyes fall to the next lines and read on. I, compelled by the imperative command of the enigmatic Eredzion, despite his mysterious origins, summoned every ounce of my dwindling strength to comply. With young Renoria secure in my arms, I embarked on a relentless journey southward. Over the course of 4 grueling days, I pushed the limits of my endurance, pausing only when absolutely necessary. Whenever fatigue threatened to overtake my human form, I shifted into my bear form, harnessing its robust strength and resilience to continue the arduous trek. Whenever the landscape opened up and demanded swiftness, I morphed into my deer form. The sleek, agile body of the deer allowed me to dart through dense forests and over fields with rapid, graceful strides, and whenever I encountered stretches of water that barred our path, I transformed into my marine form. As the 4th day drew to a close, with the sun dipping below the horizon, my heart sank with the setting sun. My legs ached from the relentless pace, and despair crept in as the fabled red oak remained elusive. I began to fear I had lost my way, or worse, that the tree was but a figment of a deluded promise. The landscape was unfamiliar, and the fading light only deepened my uncertainty. Just as hope seemed a threadbare concept, a silhouette materialized through the twilight haze. A small town, ghostly in its silent desolation, emerged on the path before me. The buildings were hollow echoes of life, their structures ravaged by time and neglect, standing as forlorn sentinels to a forgotten era. My heart heavy, I trudged toward the town, each step a monumental effort against the pull of fatigue. At the very edge of this deserted town, where the shadows grew long and the air held the chill of impending night, I spotted it. An imposing structure that seemed to command the landscape. It was an abandoned town hall, grand in its decay, located under the expansive boughs of what could only be the red oak I had sought. The tree stood majestic and resilient, its vast canopy a stark contrast against the twilight sky, its limbs stretching wide as if to embrace the weary traveller. Beneath this mighty red oak, the town hall loomed, its once proud architecture now shrouded in the cloak of abandonment. Relief washed over me in waves, and I felt a surge of renewed energy. With Renoria still secure in my arms, I hurried toward the sanctuary promised by Eredzion, driven by the primal need for safety and the mystical assurance of the red oak's protective shade. The last rays of the sun had vanished, replaced by the creeping shadows of dusk. The protective aura that had shielded me throughout my desperate flight dissipated. In its absence, a sinister darkness enveloped the air around me, chilling my spirit as much as my body. The distant howls of dire wolves broke the eerie silence, their ferocious calls slicing through the night with increasing intensity. The urgency of their pursuit was palpable, driving me to push my tired limbs beyond their limits. I bolted toward the refuge, the abandoned town hall under the red oak, with the sounds of the dire wolves echoing ominously behind me. Casting hurried glances over my shoulder, I saw a pack of undead wolves, ghastly figures bounding through the twilight with supernatural speed. They were closing in, their eyes glowing with a malevolent fire, their snarls a promise of doom. Heart-pounding, I surged forward, every muscle screaming in protest. Just as the first of the wolves prepared to pounce, I crossed the threshold of the town hall. The boundary seemed to act as an invisible barrier. To my profound relief, not one of the creatures dared to cross it. They paced and growled at the edge, but no farther, as if repelled by some unseen force. For a moment, I stood in the dim corridor of the building, catching my breath and listening to the frustrated howls of the wolves outside. Their cries eventually faded into the distance, and I allowed myself a moment to feel the safety of the walls around me. With a cautious heart, I ventured deeper into the sanctum of the town hall, each step resonant with the echoes of its past grandeur. Now, safely ensconced within these walls, I take pen to paper to document the extraordinary events that led me here. The being named Eredzion, whose intervention has granted me this temporary sanctuary, has left an indelible mark on my soul and on the fate of the young Renoria. As I record these occurrences, I am overwhelmed with gratitude. I, Ramses Payton, and the proud lineage owe a profound debt to Eredzion, a debt we may never fully repay, but will always acknowledge as long as we live. Renoria sat very still, the weight of the words steeping through her like winter into stone. Upon my back I carried the future. She felt the sentence settle into her, bone deep, as if Ramses had lifted that burden from his shoulders and set it upon hers at last. Images rose unbidden, a besieged keep, the hush before a monstrous mercy, Annie's lullaby like a blade wrapped in silk, and then the figure in the fog who halted time with a hand and said, "She will live." The red oak unfurled in her mind like a banner of reprieve, and she saw him running, bare, dear sea, while an infant slept against a heart that would break before it would fail. A quiet vow gathered in her chest. You were never a traitor, she thought, steady and solemn. You were the road I walk. She imagined him kneeling before her mother, confessing failures that were only proofs of love, and wished she could take the old shame from his hands and replace it with rest. Even now, the echo of Annie's whisper threaded the silence, "I just want my dolly," and Renoria felt that strange ache of pity and dread, a child's plea caught in the teeth of the world. She closed the book softly, as one might close a wound. Rising, she unfastened the day's velvet and fur, exchanged it for the plain quiet of night, and moved through the chamber as the new fire whispered to the stone. She slipped beneath the sheets, the cold finding her and then receding, and lay staring at the dark. Sleep came fitful, a tangle of embers and frost. Wolves held at a threshold they could not cross, the vast red canopy breathing shelter, a hand lifted and the world stilled, and over all of it the line that would not fade. Upon my back I carried the future, beating like a distant drum as she drifted into restless dreams.